In today's episode, a group of staff members and tourists have a secret after-hours party at an animal reserve in South Africa. It was during this time when a staff member accidentally leaves the cheetah cage open. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying cheetah attack on 3-year-old Jacob Pieters. Welcome to Final Affliction. John Varty's Tiger Canyon Wildlife Farm sits in the Free State province of South Africa. South Africa has its fair share of big nature parks and wildlife reserves, but Tiger Canyon is different in a big way. Tigers don't naturally occur in Africa at all, but John Varty, the acclaimed filmmaker and wildlife conservationist, opened the park to create a breeding program to combat China's dwindling Bengal tiger population. For years now, Varty has played the biggest role outside of China in bringing the magnificent cats populations back to their former glory. But the farm doesn't just hold the imported tigers and their cubs. It's the place to visit if you want to see exotic cats. Lions, leopards, cheetahs, they've got it all. And just a few miles away is the Londolozi Game Reserve, an upscale resort that plays host to most of the tourists who come from all over the world to visit the best place to see all of the big cats in one place. But March 2017 was an unusually relaxed time for the staff at Tiger Canyon. They only had 2 groups of tourists consisting of about a dozen visitors altogether, and most of them were in their 20s and 30s. The 2 groups naturally got along with each other as well as the staff members. It wasn't long before both the people who worked at the farm and the tourists had a few parties and barbecues together. It's not exactly encouraged to mingle too closely with the tourists, but South Africans are a friendly bunch, so it's easy to see how the outsiders' visit went from business to pleasure so quickly. On Friday, March 24th, Tiger Canyon's manager, Jacob Pieters, took all of their visitors on a game drive to see the entire farm from top to bottom. During this time, his wife, Sophie, and their 3-year-old son prepared dinner for their guests. By late afternoon, the lot had returned and devoured the food set out for them. Jacob and Sophie left for the evening, leaving their guests in the care of a handful of staff members. But unbeknownst to them, the moment they left, the party started. Out in the wilderness with no one in earshot, the group lit a fire and got started on a party before it even got dark. By 10 that evening, almost all of their booze was finished, but not to worry, the South Africans who were partying with them had plenty of contacts who could sort them out in no time. A few phone calls later, one of the partying staff members took a walk to meet a taxi on the dirt road that led to Tiger Canyon. They exchanged cash with some booze, and the taxi driver drove away. But while walking back with the booze, he decided for some reason to stop behind the cheetah enclosures. Inside were 4 cheetahs held behind a metal fence. He needed to open a gate, walk through the enclosure toward another gate on the far side of the cage, and then he'd enter the area where the bungalows and reception buildings were. The people who worked at Tiger Canyon got along well with the usually dangerous animals. They'd been born in captivity, and even though they weren't exactly tame, they were very friendly with the people who fed and cared for them. They simply stared at the man walking through their home curiously from behind the bushes and trees. Cheetahs are some of the smallest of the big cat family, and they prefer to hunt small game. Even if they had been hungry, which they were not, the humans striding through the enclosure were a little too large for their usual tastes. That's not to say that they won't attack if they're especially hungry or when they're threatened, because they absolutely will. But the cheetahs knew the staff members fed them every morning and evening, and they had no interest in hurting them at all. But the staff member who'd walked through with his hands full of their beverages kicked the last gate closed behind him without latching it shut at all. As the party wore on until the early morning hours, that gate stood seemingly closed, but in truth it could swing open with even the slightest draft. When the music turned off and everyone went off to bed, everything became silent. Cheetahs are incredibly curious creatures, so it shouldn't be surprising that one of the 4 came nosing closer, its snout in the air, smelling the empty bottles and snacks that were left outside the bungalows. Before the sun came up, the cheetah was out on the grounds, scavenging the crumbs and whatever else was left behind. By 6 a.m., the sun was out, and the staff members, hungover and sour, started making their rounds. The escaped cheetah slunk back into some bushes when the movement around him became apparent. By the time that Jacob, Sophie, and their young son pulled into the parking lot, the evidence of the previous night's goings-on was already cleared, and no one noticed that one of the cheetahs was missing when they threw chunks of meat over their fence for breakfast. But now, up in a tree, the predator was watching silently and almost invisible as the people on the grounds made their rounds. It had missed breakfast, and its stomach was empty. It immediately spotted the toddler, and little Jacob was of a much more appropriate size for the cat to try for. At 7 a.m., Sophie headed into the kitchen to start preparing breakfast, and Jacob Sr. went out with his Jeep to feed the tigers on the other side of the park. The park stretched for hundreds of acres, and Jacob would be gone for the next few hours at least. Sophie left her son to play with his toy trucks and plastic animals like she normally would. Every cat in Tiger Canyon had dozens of acres, and every one of those enclosures was fenced and gated. They'd never had an animal escape, so the chances of little Jacob meeting a predator was almost non-existent. While she cooked and set the tables, Jacob played happily in the grass and sand. His back was turned to the trees where the cheetah was perched. Sophie was in the kitchen, and all of the staff were either cleaning up a bungalow or out feeding the lions, leopards, and tigers. The creature climbed down to take advantage of the opportunity, heading straight for the blond boy playing in the morning sun. Its padded paws made no noise as it stalked closer to the boy, its shoulders brought high and its head held low. Now it was out of the grass and in full view of the vast green lawn. If anyone had come by in those seconds, they'd have seen the animal immediately, but no one was there except little Jacob, singing nursery rhymes while he drove his truck on his hands and knees. Engrossed in his game and in his song, the boy had no inkling or warning of the thing that sprang on his back. The cheetah took a leap, folded its claws around Jacob's chest, and bore its fangs into his face. The boy screamed in terror and pain, pinned to the ground, helpless to run or fight. Jacob's attacker released its hold on Jacob's face and bit down again. This time, its aim was fatal, right between the ear and shoulder. The cheetah had Jacob by the neck. Blood spurted over its yellow-spotted fur, and it increased the force of its grip, cutting off all oxygen to Jacob's brain. Jacob's hysterical screams were cut off instantly when the animal took hold of his throat. By that time, everyone in the vicinity ran out to investigate the sound. Sophie immediately knew something was wrong when she heard her son's panicked yell. She ran from the kitchen, dropping a stack full of plates as she went. At the door, she saw the gruesome scene on the lawn. The cat was straddling her boy. There was blood everywhere. With an anguished wail, she ran even faster, but a gardener nearby was already streaking across the grass. He reached the boy first. With his bare hands, he grabbed the cheetah around the waist and lifted it into the air. The animal wasn't letting go without a fight. Jacob was hauled up with it for a moment, but his weight and the worker's yank ripped the nails and teeth right through his skin. The claws dragged across Jacob's small chest, leaving raw grooves behind, and the fangs tore his throat to shreds. Then Sophie was there, just as Jacob fell from the animal's grasp. She immediately grabbed him by the neck, trying to stem the torrents of blood that were streaming from her son's wounds. The man, strengthened by adrenaline, threw the 100-pound raging cheetah across the lawn. The cheetah yelped when it struck the ground. It bounded on its feet the moment it landed, streaking away, back into the cover of the wilderness. Jacob wasn't conscious, but he was still breathing, a horrid gurgling sound that sent bubbles of blood out from his mouth. Sophie managed to keep her hand steady for 20 minutes, not daring to move Jacob for fear that he'd bleed out if she lost her grip. Then the emergency helicopter arrived, landing right there on the lawn. Jacob Sr., still out in the field, saw the helicopter flying overhead and land around the place where his wife and son should have been. He jumped in his car, thinking one of the rowdy tourists had gotten into some sort of accident or another, But to his horror, he arrived in time to see his wife and the limp and bloodied body of his small son climbing into the aircraft. He didn't bother to see if anyone was all right. Jacob got right back in his truck and raced to the nearest town, the closest place that the helicopter would find a suitable hospital. When he arrived, his son was in surgery, and Sophie was in the waiting room where hospital staff had already given her a clean set of clothes. But it was too late. Jacob was brain dead long before they reached the hospital, though he remained stable and breathing for several days in his hospital bed. His parents had no choice but to take him off life support, to spare him and themselves the agony of seeing him die a slow and drawn-out death. Authorities decided that the attack was a result of human error, and the cheetah in question was recaptured and placed back in its enclosure. New spring lock bolts were placed on every gate in Tiger Canyon. The 4 staff members who'd been drinking with the tourists were all fired for their behavior, and the staff member who smuggled in the booze and left the gate open was charged with involuntary manslaughter. But given the fact that it was truly an accident, he never saw the inside of a prison cell. Jacob and Sophie Pieters never set foot on the grounds again. Working on the location where their son had been attacked was too much for them to bear. Even still, they will never forget the day that their son, 3-year-old Jacob Pieters, met his terrifying final affliction.